Welcome to this week's edition of Windows Business Weekly. Today I'm going to talk a little bit more about Outlook and virtual desktops in Windows 10 and have a look at the new Collections feature in Microsoft's Edge browser. All that is coming up. So last week I was looking at a problem with Windows virtual desktops and Outlook. So if you remember, there were a couple of issues if you put Outlook onto, let's say, a second virtual desktop with the default configuration. You end up with the reminders pop-up window coming up on the first desktop, and if you press the standard shortcut or the pinned shortcut on the taskbar, it will open up a second instance of Outlook rather than take you to the running instance that you already have open, let's say, on a second desktop. Now, I showed you a couple of ways to work around those problems. One thing that I should mention is that you can actually change the default behavior of virtual desktops in Windows 10 in the Settings app. Now, I don't like the alternative setting, I like the default setting and how that works, but I just want to tell you a little bit about that. So if you open up the Settings app in Windows 10, so you can do that by pressing the Windows key and I at the same time, and if you use the search box at the top and you put in there virtual desktops, and in the list of results you'll get an option that says Customize Virtual Desktop Settings. Now, if you click on that and scroll down to virtual desktops, you'll see at the bottom there's a drop-down menu that says, on the taskbar, show windows that are open on only the desktop that I'm using. Now, that is the default setting, and that is the setting that I prefer to work with. But you can also change it to all desktops. Now, if you change it to all desktops, that means what you'll actually see on the taskbar are all instances of currently running applications, regardless of which desktop they're located on. And if you set it to this mode, then if you click the standard Outlook shortcut on the taskbar, it will actually take you to the running instance on whichever desktop it actually happens to be open. So you can try that for yourself. So you don't need to modify the shortcut like I showed you in last week's episode. Now, the disadvantage of not using the default setting, in my mind, default settings are usually default settings for a reason, is that it's a bit of a mess because you see, of course, a lot of stuff on the taskbar, even if it's not open on the current desktop, and it all gets a little bit confusing. It's easier to manage on a larger screen in that mode. On a small notebook screen, you kind of end up flipping between desktops and not really understanding what's going on. But at least that's my impression of it. But it really depends on you, of course, on your personal preferences about how you want to work with virtual desktops. Somebody also commented that quite often it's possible and normal to have a second instance of Outlook running at the same time. For instance, if you want one window showing your inbox and one showing your tasks and another showing your calendar. And I also do that. But it's a little bit different from having two actual instances of Outlook open at the same time. It's not quite the same thing, and it doesn't behave in quite the same way. So I'm not going to show you the nuances between those things, but there are some minor differences between opening a real second instance of Outlook and then opening a second window when Outlook is already running that will show your calendar or your tasks or something like that. So there's a lot of little nuances here about how these things behave in Windows, and you just really have to check it out and see what works for you. But what I showed you last week, this is what works for me, but it is a little bit more complicated to configure because you need that customized shortcut on your taskbar. If you didn't catch last week's episode, have a look back and you'll understand what I'm talking about. Also, I just wanted to quickly mention the reminders window. So I said that my option was just basically to disable it in the options within Outlook. But that doesn't mean you can't open it manually. So in Outlook, there's always the option on the ribbon to show the reminders pop up if you want. So even if you disable it in settings or It just a show reminders pop-up. If you uncheck it, that doesn't mean you can't see that reminders window. You just have to manually open it if you actually want to see it. So I'm going to end it there on Windows 10 virtual desktops and Outlook, and just have a play around and see what it is that you want to do with that. So the main thing that I want to talk about this week is Microsoft's new Edge browser. Now this is still in testing phase, it's still in preview. There are 3 different channels that you can join: the Canary channel that's updated daily, the Dev channel which is updated weekly, and the Beta channel which is updated once every month or once every 6 weeks, something like that. It's expected to make its way into Windows 10 possibly in the spring of next year, so it's still some way off before it sees kind of a general availability. But even using the Dev channel, I have to say it's fairly stable. It's probably not something that you want to roll out to your users right now, however, but it's something that you might want to play around with or use if you're a freelancer or you're taking responsibility for your own IT. What I wanted to talk about there is a feature called Collections, and I'll show you this on the screen as I'm speaking so you can understand what it is that I'm talking about. Now essentially Microsoft has said that one of the biggest pieces of feedback they receive from users of their browsers is it's very difficult to organize all of the information that you have open in, a whole plethora of tabs that you might have there. Sometimes I end up with 20, 30, even more tabs open at any one time. And there needs to be some way to kind of organize that information. So what Collections does is it opens up in a side panel, and it allows you basically to group pages together, to open them at a later date, and to export that information to, at the moment, just to Word and Excel in a structured format. So if you have those websites in your collection listed in a particular order, then when they're exported to Word or Excel, they will be exported in that order as well. And what's great about Collections is that you can also add notes. So not only do you get to add websites to that list, you can add notes, and you can also add parts of websites. So you can drag and drop onto the collection that you've created maybe an image from a website, maybe a paragraph of text. You don't have to add an entire website. So this is great for people who need to gather research, or anybody really who needs to just organize their thoughts into something that they can reference at a later date. Now, this of course is very much a feature in preview. It's not enabled by default. You have to go and enable it in the flags. It's an experimental feature. I'll show you again on the screen here the URL, how you get to flags, and what you need to check there to enable this feature. Probably the main issue with it at the moment is that your collections are bound to the particular instance of Edge that you're using. So if you move to another device, or for whatever reason you can't get access to the version of Edge that you're running at the moment, your collections are gone. They're not there, basically. They don't move around with you like your favorites or like your passwords do, for instance. And for me, that's the big issue with collections at the moment, and why I'm not really too deeply involved in creating a huge amount of them, because I know that I can't move them to another instance of Edge. As far as I understand, Microsoft is planning to add synchronization for collections. I think it's absolutely essential, if this feature is going to be useful, that we have that. There are another couple of issues with it. For instance, if you have a whole load of tabs open, you have to add each page individually to a collection. You can't at the moment say add all of the open tabs, for instance. But again, I think that's something that Microsoft has said that it is working on and that it will add, because of course this feature is really very much in preview. But I think this is a great feature. I think it's something that differentiates the new Microsoft Edge from Google Chrome, for instance. It'll be interesting to see whether Chrome bothers to copy this feature. I suspect they won't initially, because the new version of Edge will have such a small market share that it's not really worth to do it, but we'll see how that goes. So I think the new Edge is really shaping up to be a great browser. Performance seems to be great. Some of the new features that are being added in there are things that I think could be really useful once they're fleshed out and available for everybody to use. And I think it's really a great time now to start looking at Edge and thinking, whether it's something that might replace either Microsoft's existing browsers or Google Chrome in your enterprise. Okay, so I'm going to end it there this week and hope to catch you next week on Windows Business Weekly.